Go. Blackboard, I think, is completely frozen, which really sucks. There. Okay, yay. I put a folder on the server for your rework midterm thingy. You can certainly just stick it in there, and then I will pull that and get that all set for you. It's almost November, yay. Seriously, this month has been the worst October ever.
I hate you.
Just from a standpoint of being absolutely
Is this week
insane.
8 or 7?
8. 8? Yes, 8.
I know the paper thing was due 8, so I was just trying to figure out if it's 7 or
9.
'cause I had a class
That's
that
due
started
9.
2 weeks ago, so I'm trying to match each.
Oh yeah, when you have a class that start week 7, that gets confusing. There they all go. There we go. Okay, so if Blackboard ever cooperates, life would be good. So today's plan is a couple of things. We're going to be doing painting in Photoshop over the next 2 weeks, not this week, next week and the following week. So to get us a little bit more comfortable with that, with using what we have to use, we're going to use the Wacom tablets today to start just getting in the groove of using it, because we have to use it to do painting. So we're going to start using them today. So we'll talk about some of that process and setting it up. But then we're going to talk a little with a few more techniques as far as retouching. In digital editing, you do just some basic portrait retouch and then just some image retouching and stuff like that, just all over image retouching and techniques related to that. But we're going to take the portrait side of it to another step to think about a few things. We're going to talk about a little bit more of like the fashion end of that. So we're going to do frequency separation, which I know Kristen loves, because Kristen's pretty much a master at that. So she might even know more than the rest of us. But then also playing with a few techniques using the Liquify tool, because if you haven't looked at the Liquify tool recently, they've added a facial recognition feature in there. So we're going to talk just a little bit about that and just some best practices when it comes to using that when you're doing retouching. Not that we want to do like to the point of a magazine retouch where we're making people look like they don't normally look like, but we want to just talk about some of those techniques at least, so that you know how to be good and evil with them. And dodge and burning when it comes, and we've talked about this a little bit, but we do want to take it a little bit further, dodging and burning on a non-destructive layer rather than with the tools and stuff, so that we can do retouching to another degree. And we'll just kind of see how far we get into all of that, but I have some extra resources and stuff because there really isn't anything in the book that ties into this. So we're really relying on some other additional resources. And I found one late last night that I didn't get up there, so I'll have to get that one up there for you too. I think Blackboard is stuck on uploading my images because it's doing jack and it's making me mad. So we're going to copy this in case it loses everything I typed. And go back in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get everyone a Wacom tablet. If you want to use Wacom tablets, which you will need to use for part of your painting stuff coming up the next few weeks, there are 2 boxes that are currently sitting next to this little storage thing up here. But I'm going to try and get it all inside there. So one of them holds the pens, which you don't need this stand, you really just need a pen. And the other one holds the cords for the Wacom tablets. So everyone's going to need the USB and a pen and a tablet. And the tablets are all down here anytime you need them. Use them often because they are
Are
fun.
these different ones?
These are new ones.
Ooh.
We don't have the big, huge monstrosity
Like
ones
one's
anymore.
rock kind of.
We have ones that actually are manageable size.
Awesome.
Although I did ask if I could have one of the old ones at my desk, and I'm kind of regretting it because it's taking up the entire desk. Though it's nice to have, especially with 3 monitors. So yeah, anytime you want to use a tablet, I mean just during class in general, in any of your classes, they are down there in that cabinet underneath. Just take one. The cool thing with these is they are Bluetooth compatible, but we knew that would be a mess.
They can work on either PC or Mac.
Yes, we just need the driver. Yep, and you can download the driver.
Oh, there we go.
Did it go in? It was a little tricky to get in. So is anyone still and these cords are gonna be a mess, but there was no way to tie them together. So if you are left-handed like me, I will show you. Is anyone else left-handed? Am I the only one? You are? Yes. We must
I write
stick
like
together.
a left-handed person.
Do you? When you hold your, do you write like that? My 7-year-old is left-handed too, and I can't get him, I don't know how you hold your pencil, Kaylin, but he holds his pencil like this and it drives me nuts.
Oh, wow.
I cannot.
Colder pencil that my cousin always did.
Do it, really?
Yeah.
Because I
don't know
do
why.
not.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm
why.
left-handed.
My cousin always did too. She always held it.
Is it?
I've been trying since, like, I figured he would be left-handed to get him to hold it correctly, and it's killing me. He won't.
Do these ones have it where you can view it on the Wacom or no? Like the
No, these are not. Nope, these aren't monitor ones.
other ones or no?
No, the other ones were not either. We have a couple in the atrium. Yeah, that's another thing too. If you want to use the Wacom tablets where it's an actual monitor and you write right on the screen, there are 2 in the atrium, kind of on the way I'm facing on this right-hand side toward the studios. There are 2 set up with MacBook Pros that you can use, and the drivers are supposed to be all installed and set to go. There was a problem with them at first, but those you can either mirror to yours and use that way, or you can use it as like a second monitor if you want to. Either way, it will work. So we're gonna truly test these drivers today. All right, this is coming up. So you'll just plug the cord into the side opposite of all the buttons, and then the USB into the back of the computer.
How do these go? Like this? Like this?
If you are right-handed, the buttons will be on the left side. If you are left-handed, the buttons will be on the right side. And then we will have to tell the computer that you are left-handed.
If you're right-handed, they're on the left.
They're on the left, because you will hold the pen with your right hand, and then your left hand is free to use the buttons.
How do you turn it on?
It turns on automatically when you plug it in. There's no on switch. There's a tiny little light that illuminates next to the circle. And then when you hover your pen over it, it should start moving around so you know that it's working. Can I do both at the same time?
Oh, that's
Let's see if this finally
This is weird.
kind of sort of works. So it takes some getting used to. Obviously, these are pressure sensitive. I know we used them a little bit
And like touch
before,
your finger on it.
but not too much. So we're just going to refresh our memories, and they're different tablets. So we just want to make sure we kind of refresh everything. So if you are left-handed, you will want to go into System Preferences. And you'll want to go in System Preferences anyway, because you'll want to change the pressure of it possibly. You should see at the bottom in System Preferences is Wacom Tablet in the very last row. And you'll want to click on that because we have a few options here. We have the options for the pen. If you are, let's see.
How do you get it to go
Is it in
to
there?
preferences?
You can use your mouse if you're having problems with it to make it set up correctly. Make sure it's, especially if you're left-handed and you have it flipped around. If you need to change the fact that you're left over right-handed, you have to go, once you're in Preferences in the Wacom Tablet driver, you have to go to the Mapping tab. The pen should come up by default, and then you go under Mapping, and then you want the Express keys to the right. You can change this top, right, left, bottom, so if you'd rather use this tablet in portrait mode, which I think is a little weird, you can change that. But I would say you're probably going to be left or right. So it's set up to the left if you are right-handed, because you will use those keys with your left hand. And if you are left-handed, you will want the keys on the right. And it should flip-flop your everything that you do then. So now, yeah, now it's totally backwards. All right, crud. I gotta get it. There we go. Down. Yes. Okay. And once you get it set, you'll be good to go. Then it will be easier to use. Now, as far as the pen is concerned, this one, I don't have the mice with it, but I believe this one does come with a mouse, so you can actually put it on top of here and use it as a mouse. We don't have them in here, so it doesn't matter. I don't know why you'd want to do that when you have a mouse to use. That'd be kind of counterintuitive. So make sure it's set to pen, but it will be by default. The eraser tab in the middle, you can set that to do whatever it is you want to do. So if you want the eraser to be like a right click instead of actually erasing, you can. But for what we're doing in Photoshop, I would leave it as is and not change it, because you'll want the eraser to actually erase. It will switch to the erase tool and erase. The pen tool, the pen tab is really the only thing we would want to pay attention to. So we have two little buttons on the pen itself for a left or for a bottom click and a top click that you can do whatever you want to do. I believe by default, I don't remember, I may have changed this already for myself. But I like to, this is just a personal preference, I like to make one of those buttons a right click so that as I'm working on something, if I click with the mouse, I get the right click and can make new folders. Then I don't have to use my mouse at all. So I always make the bottom one, I make that my right click, but that's just me. Do whatever you want.
I think last time I was using it, I was always pressing the buttons.
That's the other problem. If you find you push these buttons a lot as you're using the pen, I try and position it so my hands are off of it, but if you find you do that, you can actually disable it by clicking the disable button. So if you would much rather that, I find the bottom one I push more than the top one. So if you want to disable the bottom one from doing anything, you can, and you could make the top one something, because I find you don't push that as easy because it's higher up. So it's totally up to you. Clicks, right click, set my back. The other thing to check is just to find a blank spot on here to click, and then simply push and hold your pen down, and you'll see this current pressure thing go up, and the harder you push, the higher it goes. If it goes to maximum really quick, just by not pushing very hard, you may want your tip feel to be a little bit higher or lower, so that if you tend to push harder on your pen tips, you would put this more towards the firm side, because you have to push harder to get up to maximum. If you're very light with how you write with this, or maybe like writing in pencil in general, if you tend to write lighter, you probably want this tip feel softer so it doesn't take much to get up to maximum. By default, it's going to be right in the middle, which most people don't hear a whole lot from that. But you may find you want to go a little bit one way or the other. Maybe I'll try this and see what this does. So you simply adjust that. You can change how fast you have to double click to open something, like if you're using it as an actual mouse, which I use my Wacom as a mouse all the time. But if you double click fast or slow and it doesn't open the way you want it to, you can change how fast. Or how big of a gap in between your double clicking there is before it opens a folder. That would probably be the only thing. I don't know that I would play with the tilt sensitivity now. You have to be pretty comfortable with the Wacom tablet to make that change and understand what it's doing. So we're not really going to do much with that yet. The only other thing you could do, now these do have the ability to also be a touchpad. Like if you want to use this like your laptop, you can enable that. I would not, because then you can use your finger to do whatever you want. I would not enable that because when you rest your hand on here and you're using the pen, it activates your hands too. So I would leave that off unless you absolutely want to use it as a touchpad without the pen.
How do you turn it off?
There's a little checkbox. So you have to hit under Tool, that middle section here.
Touch.
You have to hit Touch and just make sure that it's unchecked.
Enable touch input off.
Yep, just make sure that's unchecked and then you're good. Now the other thing you may want to look at is your buttons. All the lovely little buttons here. you have the ability, now you have to use this fairly often to remember what every button is, but you have 6 buttons, 3 on the top, 3 on the bottom, that you can customize to be whatever it is that you want. There are specific maybe keyboard shortcuts and stuff like that. It can be very specific to Photoshop. So in this functions tool here, by default it says all other. So it's like every application aside from ones that you can do specific things. Like you could add in Lightroom in here if you wanted to. But Photoshop is recognized as one that the Wacom tablet is used for. So what you want to think about, and you can customize this, is to first click on Photoshop under the application when you have the functions.
How?
Are you in the functions tool or are you on a different one? There we go. Now, oh, it doesn't. Okay. Hit the plus button over here. Anyone else is missing? Should be there. And then you can choose Photoshop CC. And it should be good. If you're missing it, you can hit the plus button to the right and you can add in applications. I noticed that Lightroom does not come up, which is weird. I should see if I can. I should have brought in my Shuttle Pro to play with, and I didn't. I'll bring it in next week. It won't work well for painting. It's probably more of something to talk about in workflow, but it's I don't know if you guys have ever seen a Shuttle Pro. Actually, Mark's the one that convinced me to buy one.
What's a shuttle, bro?
I think it's going to work better for workflow than anything else. It is, let me bring one up. Shuttle Pro version 2, that's the one. It's this little device that you sit on your desk, so it's not like a mouse that moves around. Like all these buttons do things, the dial will do things. There's a middle, those 3 little buttons as another dial to do stuff.
Macros basically on a mouse.
Kind of. Yeah, it's basically a bunch of shortcut keys. So it's better for workflow than it is for what we're doing in digital editing, but I use it in Lightroom. Mark says this is how he gets his weddings edited the same night that he shoots them. So I actually was doing it with the wedding that I did over the weekend last night, and it is going a bit faster. I've had it since last December, and I just installed the driver
Of course, yeah.
this weekend. I've played with it before, but I'd never installed it on my computer. So I can set all these buttons to do all sorts of different things, and then this little dial will turn and like I can advance to the next photo, I can rotate a photo. Like in Lightroom, I have this right black button set to be my pick, the left one to be my reject, this one to rotate an image, import, export to Photoshop, and all sorts of things. I have grid view, develop module, so I set it all up to be very specific things. So I can click, 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 but then I need my mouse for certain things. So it's similar in how we have to set this up, but obviously for a much different usage. So you can select Photoshop and you can set these keys to do certain things. Like if you want this top button to go to the brush or the clone stamp, or if you're painting and you want it to be certain things, you can set it to do whatever it is. So I can, where is it? Tablet, keyboard. The trick is, this one is a little bit different. App,
On-screen
brush
controls.
tools, on-screen controls. So you can actually set it up. It's probably easiest if you just know the quick keys, because I can do a keystroke. So I can say, I want this one to go to the brush tool. And I can call it brush tool. It's usually the easiest. But yeah, you can set this up to be every single button will do whatever it is you want it to do. And then the actual dial itself, you have certain options for, but where, touch ring, there we go.
Wait, what did you click to get to them when you did like the brush thing?
So I went under keyboard
Okay.
and then keystroke. So then you basically just push on your keyboard exactly what it is you want it to do.
Okay.
Like if I wanted, let's see, Maybe I want one of these to be like flatten image or something. Let's do this one. That might be the one. Let's do in Photoshop. I want it to Command Control Shift F because that's the quick key I set up in Photoshop for flatten image. But by default, Photoshop doesn't have flatten image. So I created one. So I could create a button to flatten image. So all I got to do is push the button on my Wacom tablet and it flattens it for me. It's pretty awesome. So all 6 of these can be whatever it is that you want to use. I think I want clone stamp also as one. Because I'm going to use that today. There we go. And I bet you could set one of these buttons to run an action. Open or run. I bet. Oh no, it's an application to run. Screen controls, colors, drawing, radial menu, Wacom screen, app shortcuts. I wonder what that would do. Oh, I know what that is. That's not what I wanted to do. Can I undo?
If we're doing frequency separation, it would help to get the lasso tool in there too.
To do, oh yeah, that's true. You could do that. Yep, we could set up the lasso tool. Keystroke, let's make that one.
Is there a quick key for like Gaussian blur or anything?
Bah, delete, 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 delete. There isn't unless you set one up.
Okay.
But you could set one up and then make that a button, absolutely. So we could use the lasso tool. So yeah, so you set these up however you want. Then there's another tab that says touch ring. And you can, this touch ring does a couple of different things. By default, the ring itself has a setting that you can do. And then there's this middle button that you can push on here. And it toggles between these 4 little lights that are on your Wacom tablet. And each one can be set to do something different. So you can make this ring do a lot of different things. So like this first upper right corner by default will cycle through your layers. So all you have to do is push the touch button until it, and every time you push it, it shows up on your screen. It tells you what it's going to. So when you're in Photoshop, you can push it to like cycle layers. And then as you move your hand around this ring, your finger around this ring up or down, as you go down, it goes down through your layers. And as you go, clockwise, it goes down through your layers. And as you go counterclockwise, it goes up. So it's a fast way to select different layers.
So how would I make it, zoom and then move, type of thing?
So if you want to zoom, so auto scroll zoom is the one that's in the upper right corner by default. So
Not in mine, but okay.
Not okay. If it's not one of yours, then you can set one of them. So you would just set it auto scroll or zoom, or you can just simply do scroll.
And how would that you'll show me when we get that in there.
Yeah. So you could set one just to scroll, and you could set one to zoom.
Oh,
you could make them separate.
I have auto scroll, zoom, cycle layers, brush size, and rotate.
Brush size and rotate. Yep, that's what I have. Those should be the default settings. So yeah, so you can adjust your brush size, like instead of using your left and right bracket keys, you can use this lower left corner to just turn the dial to increase and decrease your brush size. And then if you need to rotate an image, that's what the lower right corner does. But you can change them. I think by default, those are pretty common ones that you would use. I don't know if you have another one you'd want to change it to, but you certainly can. Dude, there we go. I need to get an image for you guys to play with in case you need one. I think right now it's in here. Oh man, this thing's not set to scroll.
I like to use f-stoppers, go through on frequency separation.
It's still not going? Gosh, this is ridiculous. F-stoppers, that's the link that I used
Okay, good deal.
for today. So hopefully it's similar. There's we're going to talk frequency separation, and there's a lot of different techniques when it comes to frequency, of ways to do the same thing essentially. So we're going to use one way, but that particular link that I put in Blackboard shows 2 or 3 different ways. So yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to do it. I need to
Oh,
get
it's the same one I usually go to.
Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah, it's a fairly easy technique. I
Yeah.
just need to transfer a file for you guys so we can play with it. And it doesn't want to connect to the server, and it's not uploading to Blackboard to make it easy to show you. There it goes. Oh my gosh, the realization that I really haven't eaten much today is starting to set in.
Well, why don't you eat something?
It's my stomach.
Oh.
Because my stomach is going blah, 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 blah. So if we start hearing it in recordings, or you
Soup.
guys can hear it, it'll be interesting. Adding advanced. Let's do it, book files. I'm just going to transfer an image because I know not everyone's going to have an image to use. So I have one from some other, I think it was like a lynda.com thing from a while ago, and it works well for it. So not quite sure whether I can use it or not, but we're going to.
Where are you putting this?
I'm going to put it in book files. Is it in there? Oh, it is in there.
Where?
Whoops. Okay. I didn't think it was up there. So on the server, in our class folder, there's a book files folder, and you're going to see one that says EX, for example, files, Photoshop retouch portraits. And then there's an exercise files folder inside there. Just kind of keep whittling it down. But we are going to use, we're not going to use the PSD. We're going to use the TIFF. And we're going to open that one in Photoshop. So once you play with the system preferences to your liking, we are going to be done inside there. So we don't really have to do much more. It's getting the pen set up, and then if you want any of the express keys, the 6 keys, or if you want to change any of the default touch rings, which I don't think you will. But on the touch ring, whatever one is lit up is your current one. So you'll see it right on your Wacom tablet is your current one. If you shouldn't need to calibrate your monitor as far as getting it set, as mapping it. You shouldn't need to because it pretty much just skews your screen to the corners of the Wacom tablet. And it skews it to, if you see on your Wacom tablet, there's 4 little like crop marks almost. With the size screen that we're working with, it fits within that space. I know you can set it to the full tablet if you want to and force the proportions to be the full size of the tablet. I don't think you necessarily need to. You should be just fine with the default within those hash marks. But you can change that if you want to. But once you're done, you're done. So you're good. Now, the image, I'm just going to use this image. Use it if you want to. Don't use it if you don't want to. Is that screen jacked up? What is wrong with that screen? Holy cow. Okay, let me see if I turn it on and off, if that makes a difference, or if I switch devices. It'll probably screw up someone
I see
else's
that.
screen. I'm like, what is that? It's worse when you look at it straight on, but from the
Yeah,
side,
turn
it
it over
just
here
looks like
too.
a...
Or is that the hair?
That's the hair.
That's
Okay.
okay. Yeah. No. Okay. That was worth a try.
Oh, this is gonna be a fun one.
Where is that photo?
It's on the server in the book, under our class, under book files. And then you will see it's called EX files, PS retouch portraits. It's an exercise file from a lynda.com video that I watched a long time ago. Nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it works.
So I see that this zooms, but how do I like move it that way? Like, you know?
I believe, oh, you would use, by default, that bottom one, unless you changed it, the quick key.
Which one is that?
The very bottom express key. By default, that's set to spacebar.
Okay.
And then you would just hold that down and then drag it with your pen.
Oh, okay. That helps. There we go.
So yeah, unless you changed it, you
I
can,
didn't. That's one of them I didn't
oh,
change.
I'm gonna open that in Photoshop here. So yeah, if you have it set to zoom in and out, then by default that bottom one turns into a space bar, and then you can grab and move it however you want. So hopefully you're able to find it if you want to use it. If you have your own you want to use, you most certainly can. totally up to you. So aside from Kristen, has anyone done frequency separation before on an image or even heard of it? Okay, so when we talked about retouching in digital editing, and Angela, you'll get there in like the next week or two, we talked about different techniques as far as retouching skin tones, or I mean the skin, like blemishes and stuff like that. But that basic technique, what it often does is it removes the texture of the skin, like the pores and stuff like that, which for some people they want. They just want that all gone, and that's fine. But for a lot of people, they want to maintain that texture, but just have flawless looking skin. And even some of these areas, like she's got a lot of highlight on her cheek here and even over here on her nose too, just from the makeup in general, that we might want to tone down or just make that smoother. And when we do that, we're losing the texture. So what frequency separation does is it separates basically the skin into a low and a high frequency. And I'm going to use the
Like
I'm gonna use the
texture
link.
And it's like
Texture and
then
tone.
the colors and the highlights
Yes.
and stuff like that.
That's exactly what it is. I'm going to bring up, I think the link on Blackboard that I have has a good visual in it that might help a little bit. Think of it like audio, and I think this is what the website did too. Talks about frequency separation in terms of audio. When you hear sounds, you hear low frequencies and you hear high frequencies. High frequencies could be anything from like certain cymbals on a drum set, or higher pitched frequencies in a trumpet or something like that. And then the low frequencies are often those bass sounds. Well, images are very much the same way. Here's the visual that I'm looking for. Images are very much the same way, where we have low and high frequencies. When it comes to images, the low frequencies are usually the colors and the tonal ranges, like the highlight shadow sides of the face. And when it comes to high frequencies, that's where all the fine detail is. That could be like the detail in the hair. It could be blemishes that appear on a person's face, the pores, that kind of stuff. Those are those higher frequencies. So what we want to do is we want to separate those two so that we can retouch and smooth those highlight shadow areas if we need to, while still keeping the details. And then remove the blemishes without losing some of the tonal ranges. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to separate the frequencies of this image and then retouch on two separate layers. Now there are several ways to do this. Frequency separation can be done with a high pass filter. It can be done in a variety of different ways. We're going to use a technique that maybe is a couple extra steps, but I think is going to give us a bit more detail in the end, rather than maybe have to go back and do a few things. So like this image is a good example, and you've probably seen this before, but if you look at this link on your computer up close, you're going to see Albert Einstein. But if you look at it from far away, like if you look at one of the TV screens further away from you, if I look at the ones in the back of the room, I see Marilyn Monroe. But on these front ones, I see Albert Einstein.
This works if you squint.
And if you squint, yes, if you squint, you see Marilyn Monroe. And that is because this image is two images overlaid on top of each other with two different frequencies. It uses the low frequency, which is a blurrier image, of Marilyn Monroe, and it overlays it on top of a sharpened image, which is the high frequency of Albert Einstein. And this is what we're going to do, but with the same image. So we're not going to see this ghosting effect that we see here. We're going to do it. We're going to do it in Photoshop. There we go. So this can actually be written into an action, which is kind of awesome. And actually, I believe the steps that we're using today, there is a downloadable action on that link that you can use. However, it's important to understand what you're doing here before you create an action. So what we're going to do is we are going to first duplicate our background layer 2 times. Now, if yours image opened in Camera Raw initially, just open it into Photoshop. It does not need to be a smart object for this. You can, but it's not necessary.
It has like a white coating around it.
Does it?
Yeah, but PSD did.
Oh,
Oh yeah, the
yeah.
Yeah, open the TIFF file. The PSD has some stuff done to it already. So we're gonna use the TIFF file. It's the before beginning one. But mine opened in RAW, so I don't know if yours did too. I just opened it as an image and not an object. Again, either way works. So we're gonna duplicate this twice. So what's our quick key for duplicating a background layer?
Command J.
Command J. So we're gonna do that twice. We are going to rename, come on mouse, there we go. We're gonna rename the first duplication, or the one right above the background layer. Oh, that's right, it double clicks differently. I don't want, come on, cancel. Oh, that's why mine's getting screwed up, because I zoomed in. All right, Wacom tablets and zooming in. Fail. It's not working. There we go. Okay, the bottom one needs to be the low frequency. So just so you know that the bottom one's the low and the top layer is the high frequency. I'm just gonna abbreviate it. Now, because you might have many layers in between here, you can group these two into a layer group or a folder, essentially, if you want to, by selecting both of them and then doing a Command G. I think if you do this as an action, I think it would be a good idea to put it in a folder. Just because you might do other things in between there, and that keeps it all together. So this image should work really well for this. So when you get that far, we're ready to actually do the two things to the layers that we need to do. I'm going to turn off the high frequency layer to start with, because we have to do that Marilyn Monroe effect to the low frequency. We need to blur it, which seems a little weird, but what that actually is going to do.
There's little pieces, so I thought I'd give you the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Just how did you get the frequency separation filter? Did you just make one?
Yes, I did. I highlighted the high and low and did Command G.
I missed the step where you made the high and low.
I duplicated the background layer twice, so just do a Command J 2 times.
Okay.
There we go. And then just labeled this bottom one, the low. I just changed the name of the layer to low, and then the top one to high. You do not have to group these if you don't want to, but it's just another way of organizing. I need a standing desk, but this doesn't work. So we're gonna sit unusually high so my feet can't touch the ground so I can see over these screens. Okay. So once you have the two layers created, I'm gonna move this. Let's do this a little bit so you guys can see above those TV screens.
Are they in
Or
the folder or are they
monitors.
separate from the folder?
I put them in a folder,
Okay.
so I shift-clicked both of them, and then I did Command G to put it in a group, and then I just labeled it frequency separation. Then turn off the high frequency layer and select the low frequency layer. We are going to blur this layer. We're going to use a Gaussian blur. So we're going to go under Filter, maybe. There it goes. Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. And now everyone's setting is going to be a little bit different. It depends on how close the image is. It's going to depend on how much detail there is to begin with. And of course the size of the image too. But I would say you're probably going to be somewhere around 5 pixels, maybe between like 3.5 and 5.
I did like 9.
Did you? Your goal is simply to blur the fine details. This is the layer that focuses on the skin and the tone and the color. So it's the highlight shadow areas, the, oh, come on. Now that TV screen's gonna start blinking. What the heck? There's nothing more annoying than this. All right, we'll see if it's a one-time deal or if it's gonna keep doing it. So we're blurring out all the detailed areas. You might, this one actually, yeah. The last two images I did this on of my own images, I was only about 5. So yeah, you don't want it to be super blurry, but you just want to blur out
The textures.
the details and the textures. Yep. So yeah, this one actually 7's pretty
9.3.
good. Did you do 9.3? 7 seems to be pretty good for this one. Yeah, even 9 is fine. Maybe this one's a higher resolution than the one I worked with. So yeah, maybe if you're using this sample image, I would say between 7 and 9 or just a little bit above that. But yeah, most of mine, and it could be the megapixel of my camera. I'm usually around 5.
This was your picture?
No, this one's not. This is a exercise file from a lynda.com video on a different retouching technique. But it works for what we're gonna do today, so some of the techniques were from that lynda.com video that we're gonna talk about, but not frequency separation. When you're done, hit OK. That's all we have to do to this layer. This layer's done. The high frequency layer, though, we need to turn that back on. We only turned it off so that we could see the blur. Now we're turning it back on because we need to do something to this layer. We're gonna basically over sharpen this. Now this you could do a high pass filter too. I think you don't get as much detail in textures, like when it comes to pores of the skin, stuff like that. I don't think you get as much in here, but either one will work. The link that I provided in Blackboard talks about using the high pass filter. They discuss pretty much exactly what we're doing here first, the apply image technique, which is what we're discussing. But later on, they use the high pass filter setup. So you can look at that if you want to, if you would like to try and do that effect rather than the apply image that we're doing. But I think this one's probably a bit more difficult, not difficult, they're really not, but it just has a few more things to look out for when you're doing it. So that's why I'm showing that one. Okay, so on this high frequency layer, we need to go under the image menu. We need to go down to apply image, which is about 2/3 of the way down.
Wait, what'd you do to the high frequency layer?
Just turned it on and selected
Okay.
it. Do you use the high pass when you do yours?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. So we're gonna go under image and apply image. And basically what this does, this is like a way to overlay another image on top of your file. So I could choose like a landscape if I wanted to, and basically overlay it and merge it with this image with different blend modes and opacities and stuff like that. So there's lots of different things we can do. And this is also used when we are doing certain things within certain color channels. This is used for some effects. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, where you can basically overlay a color channel over the top of the image and maybe do like a lighter color or something. So you can do weird effects and stuff like that. It's one that doesn't get used, I don't think, enough, because you can do a lot of stuff with this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to, in the apply image, now this link is a great reference if you are using a 16-bit image, because the settings are actually the opposite of what we're going to do because we have an 8-bit image. So where one adds, the other subtracts. Where one leaves one color channel, the other inverts. Just because of the bit depth difference, in order to get the same end result, you have to do opposite settings. And if you forget anything we're doing, the screenshots are here too. So we are going, whoops, not this one, this one. So what we're going to do, we have an 8-bit image, and we know that by looking in the tab up here, it says RGB/8. That's how we know we're working in an 8-bit. If it said 16, it means we're in a 16-bit. So we're going to use the same source image. We're not selecting a different image. We're going to leave this as merged. We're going to leave the color channel as RGB. If we were working in 16-bit, we would have to click this invert, but we don't need to. We need to change the blending, which is probably defaulted to multiply. We need to change that to subtract, which is going to make it completely black right now. Minus maybe a few spots. And then the offset to 128. Now it's going to, right now it's
Mine
not,
wouldn't change
I'm,
anything.
I'm pretty sure you're supposed to do the high pass
I'm
on
missing.
that layer first.
no, we don't use the high pass at all. Oh, I think I know, because we changed the blend mode of this layer afterwards. That's why. We're gonna change the blend mode. So it probably looks completely gray. Yours does not, Angela?
Not on the screen, but on the, in the layers panel it is.
Oh, maybe is your previous thing. Oh, because it's underneath. Did you blur this one?
Yeah.
Okay, so we just have to swap them because this is actually your high and this is your low. We'll just change the name and then just swap what layer's on top.
this
So that's
one's
all.
actually the high.
That one's actually the high and it should be on top. So once we're out of here, you can change it.
Okay.
How'd you get to the
Image menu, and then apply image is about 2/3 of the way down. If you have a 16-bit image, you actually have to change the blending to add instead of subtract, and then the offset is set to 0. I'm not going to do anything with scaling. This one, the screenshot is set to 2, but you only have to pay attention to, the scaling is nothing we're going to touch. That's a totally different conversation. We only need to worry about offset here. Then you hit OK. Now, yes, it's going to be completely gray. You're not really going to see a whole lot in there. But now this high frequency layer, yep, offset. Offset to 128. It's going to be subtraction or subtract blend mode, and that should be the only thing you have to touch.
We leave the scale to 0 or that 1 that it?
Scale, just leave it at whatever that defaults to.
Okay.
It's still Jessica, nothing's happened.
Did you swap your layers then?
Well, I removed
Yep, you rename them, and then you have to,
move them.
the high has to be on top. And the low on the bottom. There we go. So then we have to change the blend mode to linear light. Mine is missing something. Mine should have had a little detail, kind of like the high pass filter usually does.
I'm certain it's because you didn't add the high pass filter. Because that's what I usually do. I create the
You
two
do the high
layers.
pass and then the apply image?
Well, yeah, I do.
I have
the
never
low
done it that
frequency, I
way
do the
before.
blur, and then I do the high frequency on the high, or high pass on the high frequency, and then I combine them or whatever.
Oh, you know what I didn't do? I missed I know what it is. I think I know what it is.
Because mine looks exactly the same. I don't have detail at all.
I know what I did. I'm going to go back in the history here, back to before I did apply image. I know what I did. I didn't select the right layer.
Ah,
That's what I did.
Were you supposed to do the background?
I'm supposed to do the low frequency layer. Okay. If yours did the same thing mine did, go back to in your history palette to right after you did the Gaussian blur. Make sure your high frequency layer is selected again.
It's supposed to be like gray with like a little bit of
With some detail,
detail.
but it's once we change the blend mode, it's supposed to sharpen the heck out of this image.
Because mine's gray with like some.
Yeah, yours did have a little bit. I wonder if your offset was a little bit different. Yeah, undo it either way. It should have more detail. I know what we forgot to do. We're going to go back to apply image. what we're supposed to do, the layer is not supposed to be merged.
Ah, yeah.
It's supposed to be the low frequency. You can select different layers to basically overlay on top of your image.
So how do you get back to that to adjust it?
So you have to undo your apply image. So you probably have to go in your history palette to the step before you did apply image, which was Gaussian blur. And that will probably take you back in history to the point where you have to rename your files.
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Yeah, yours will have to do that. So for now, just bring the one that says low up on top
Okay.
so you can see what it's doing. And then you can change the names afterwards.
Then once it stopped.
So you have to change, so when you go back into apply image, you have to change this to select the low frequency layer, whatever you called that. It's the low, high, low frequency, whatever it is. You want to select the low frequency. Then make sure it says subtract and your offset is 128. Your opacity will stay at 100.
Okay, so now my low, which should be my high, is completely gray.
So yours, because yours are labeled backwards, you will select the high. Did you, okay, go back to layer order. Let's rename them before we go in there so we don't get it mixed up. Change that to low.
It used to be on the high frequency, change the blend to the,
Oh, no, I meant like it didn't blur any of them.
oh, because you have all the layers on. Turn off,
Oh.
background.
Turn this one off just for a second, just to make sure.
And then you gotta put
See
the
that
high
here?
frequency.
I'll just switch.
Did you switch it?
Oh, no, you gotta have the high on top.
So
Oh,
this
no, I'll
one-
just switch now. I didn't do anything to the high.
This one is the blur one.
I know, but you have to have the high on top, the high layer.
Go back to your name
On
change.
top, and then you select the high layer and then apply.
And then it should go.
That blurred one is your low frequency,
No.
so it is supposed to be underneath. So we're going higher.
Oh, no, the low
Okay.
has to be on bottom.
Now high
The blue one is-
frequency. Okay, now go to
Oh.
apply image and apply.
Oh, you mean have it off? Okay.
Yeah, and then, the high frequency is the one that you do the apply image to.
Okay, now select your low, your layer,
And then instead of merge, we do.
low layer, select low.
Okay.
And then 128,
There it
you're
is.
good.
And then those kept your last one, so that's all fine. So now hit okay.
There we go.
So now you should have what looks like it would be the high pass filter essentially. There we go. Now when we change the blend mode to linear light, ta-da!
See,
When you,
mine doesn't look like that. It looks shockingly sharp.
it should look sharp.
Okay.
Yes.
We do that.
So if you were to option click the background layer on and off to see the essentially the before after,
It looks very sharp.
it's gonna look sharp.
Just, like very, very sharp.
I wonder if it's just the different settings in the low frequency when we did the Gaussian blur.
Okay.
I think depending on your blur settings, you're gonna see a difference there.
Oh, that's the right one.
I did the
Linear
same
light,
one
yeah.
as you.
Okay.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Because yours was like 9.3.
Yeah.
I think mine was a little bit lower.
I went
Doesn't
lower.
like magazine ads. or like
So yeah, so your
10%.
sharpness may be a bit different. It will depend on what your Gaussian blur setting was.
Explains why they look so deep.
Okay.
and what they do.
But if you turn off that frequency separation if you have it in a folder to turn on and off both layers, it's gonna look
Okay.
sharper up front,
Size doesn't
but
spoil.
that's okay because we're going to
It's
then
not gonna
do some of the other techniques to kind of clean that up because she's got mascara all over the place. It's just nasty on so many levels. That and I do not like the pose at all.
The pose?
It's okay, but it requires just that chin area.
Yeah.
This bothers me over here. This is part of a liquefy thing we're gonna do, but that is just accentuated because of this. So up until this point, this can be an action. So you can create an action that duplicates the background layer twice, renames it, does the blur, does the apply image, and puts it into a folder if you want a folder. Up until this point, this is all action, automation worthy. Beyond this point is very specific to the image itself. So now is when we get to start using the brush, the clone stamp, the patch tool, all of our retouch tools, but we have to be aware of what layer we're on to do this. So there is a variety of different ways to do this, but we usually start with the low frequency layer. So we select the low frequency layer, and now the only thing you are paying attention to is how the highlight and shadows look and how that blends together. And if you want that to blend a bit more, like she has a lot of green makeup on, we might want to make that more subtle as far as the blending. Like, I am not a fan of how this blue is right here. I would like to blend that a little bit more, make that a little bit smoother. That's going to be our goal. We're not looking at blemishes or some of the textures like her mascara's all over the place. We're not looking at that. We're solely looking at how those color and tonal ranges work and what we want to do there. So we want to select the low frequency layer, and now we can blend this in a variety of different ways. I think, and Kristen, you probably do this even more than I do. I like using the spot healing brush for this. The clone stamp could work. I don't know, do you use something in particular when you do this?
For the low frequency?
For the low frequency.
Well, a lot of what I do is I use the lasso and I blur the colors together.
Oh, so you actually select out those areas. Like, are you thinking like edges? Like if I don't like this blue,
Yeah.
like selecting that and blurring that part?
Yeah, because it only blurs the color, not the texture.
Yeah, because it's not going to do anything with the texture. So that would be a good way of doing that. So you could lasso out certain areas and just blend. One way I was taught, I'm trying to think, it might have been on this link actually, now that I'm thinking about it, was using, is it in here? I'm trying to think. I don't know, maybe it was a different spot. But using the spot healing, and you simply just kind of brush over those areas and it starts to blend it together. Hello. But the one thing you have to be sure, now typically we keep, like when we're retouching, we blend certain layers together. We need to make sure that sample all layers is unchecked or it will screw you up. So depending on what you're using, like if you're using a clone stamp tool, you'll want to only use the current layer. Not all layers are current. I always have mine set to current and below. But you want to make sure that you're only using the current layer because that will kind of mess up what you're doing. But yeah, you could use the clone stamp tool if you wanted to. You could use the spot healing. You could use the lasso, like Kristen was talking about. What one did I set to lasso? Oh, but I need to shift lasso because mine's polygonal. Where you can then select out parts. And then simply, you're actually using the Gaussian blur when you do this?
Yeah, I was just lasso it, Gaussian blur, and you increase it a lot, pretty much.
Yeah. There we go. And you can see how the higher it goes, the more it's blending that blue in that I'm frustrated with. I just want that to be more subtle of a blend.
So it doesn't like make it very prominent, the blur? Like,
Yeah.
It doesn't give it an edge?
Yeah, it really, I mean, you'll probably see it here, but you shouldn't see it on your image. If I hit OK and deselect, you don't really see that. You don't really see that edge on your image because we've separated the frequencies.
That was on the low frequency, so it's on the blurred layer already?
Yes, it's on the blurred layer already. So that's why this low frequency layer only does tonal differences, like highlight shadow differences, and then color. So we can add blush to her if we want to, and we would do that on the low frequency layer because it's already the blurred layer, and then it doesn't go on top of the textures.
You just like paint bucket like a lasso?
Yeah, you could. Yep, you could just do that. You could just lasso it if you wanted to. You could use a very feathered brush with a certain color and just brush it on, which is one of the things we'll kind of talk about a bit. So yeah, so if I go back in my history palette to before I lassoed and then after I blurred it, you can see the difference in that blue, how it blurred. I probably could have done more if I wanted to. So there's a lot of different retouch tools you can do, but your sole purpose is to blend Like if you have areas of too much highlight and shadow and stuff like that, just to simply smooth that out. Now I'm a clone stamp girl, so I use that a lot in the spot healing. One thing too to note is that on the low frequency layer, you want to use a lot of feathering. So if you're using a brush of any type, you want that hardness level. Boop, come on, there we go. You want that hardness level to be as low as possible, if not at 0. So you have a very feathered brush. When we get to the high frequency layer, we want a brush with a higher hardness. We don't want the feathering because we're working with the textured layer. So we don't want to soften the textured layer. If you want, Terry, we're using the, if you want the Wacom tablet, we're using them.
Well, if it still shows up really hard, like even if it's at 0.
You could, are you using the lasso tool?
No, just the brush tool.
So even at 0, it's hard. Maybe your brush is too small. You can use a fairly big brush here.
Did you say you want it to be softer when you're working on the low frequency or heavier?
Softer on the low frequency because that's your blurred layer. Since that layer is the blurred one, you want a softer brush. If you use a hard brush, it's not going to work well. The high frequency, we use the harder brush because that's our texture. One thing you can do if you're using the lasso tool, and I don't know if you do this, Kristen, but one thing I would suggest if you're using the lasso tool to blur is to actually, in the lasso tool itself, to set a feathering so that when you draw your lasso, it automatically feathers your selection so that you don't get those harsh edges on the Gaussian blur. I'll try maybe 10 to start, see what that does. This is a pretty high resolution image, so it probably could, probably help if I lassoed something. Let's just do this cheek area and then go to blur, Gaussian blur. I just want to see that edge.
And
Yeah,
then
10 seems to be pretty good.
what I
You
do
can see what
notice
it's
though
doing there.
is some things are more texture than color too. You know, like
Yes.
it gets a little confusing sometimes.
Yeah, it takes a bit to understand what frequency separation is doing because things like you said, things you think are actually like highlight shadow areas that you need to work with are actually on the texture layer. So it will take a bit to play and truly understand what it's doing. I want this edge here. This is blurring quite a bit. I think I might end up using a brush for that one. But this is great when I retouch certain things where I have people with porous skin that you can see all the pores. When I'm retouching and I'm trying to blend, like in this case too, she has a lot of pores and I just want this highlight shadow to be softer. Whoops. And I tend to use the clone stamp tool where I'll just blur in, 50% is too high, 30% is better, where I like to just kind of blend that. Oh, goodness. Oh, because I'm zoomed in. No wonder why nothing's working. There we go. Where I like to blend this highlight shadow a bit more and just make it, oops, I did too much there, and make it more gradual in certain areas.
See, I feel like that makes her pores more obvious.
Because her pores are on the texture layer, so they're on the
Yeah.
high frequency layer.
So that's something, because it's on the high frequency layer, when we do the details, we'll try and tone that. We can tone that down a bit if you want to. And we could even, if it's too much on her pores, we can actually do a layer mask and we can blend out the areas where it's just too much on her pores. So that would be another option. I'm going to use the healing. That will work.
It looks so much better on the desktop.
Than it does up there, I know.
Yeah, I see Kristen's, better colors.
So I'm just going to use the healing brush for a little bit. I like to do the spot healing on those edges, like it's not doing too good on my makeup here. I'm going to have to use a clone stamp there. But where edges just need to be softened a little bit, it works fairly well, but you do have to have a larger brush for it. I do not like what that's doing at all. Yeah, this particular image.
That's what I kind of got with mine too. It made it like real light in spots, so like on her cheek I have like a really light spot.
Yeah, it's kind of overkill on her. Her makeup, I think it's just,
Really shiny.
it's very shiny. It's not a good situation. The lasso tool with the blur might work best for this one. Or a clone stamp tool at a low opacity would work too. So this does take some time. This isn't like a very quick retouch, but I think you're gonna get a better end result, especially if you're doing stuff more on the high end, as far as whether it's a fashion image or just the detail of the image. If it's gonna be a larger image, this works very well for that. There we go. Yeah, that 10 pixel seems to be a good feathering for the lasso
Yeah.
tool. I think that works well. And when you're satisfied with how that looks, you can move onto the high frequency. Oops. Let's take out that chunk. You can move into the high frequency and start taking out things like blemishes. Like her makeup is driving me nuts. It's all over the place. Like, why was that not cleaned up? I'm going to go to the high frequency layer, and I'm going to start using, like, this would be a good candidate for like the patch tool. The clone stamp tool works well, but you have to remember when you're using these to have a harder brush. So my feathered brush is not going to fare well here. So I'm going to bring the hardness down a bit, because when you feather a texture, you soften it. And that's not what we want here. So this is going to be pretty fine-tuned for what we're doing. So I never like my opacity at 100% regardless of what I'm doing, but I'm probably going to put it up there pretty high, like 80%, because I'm going to be going in here, and I don't remember, do I have an option? No, radial menu, that's not what I want. I want option. Do I not have Command Shift? I took away my option. Bah. All right, I gotta go back in my preferences. That's gonna bother me. I need functions. Oh no, Photoshop. There we go. Let's just make this one option too. Modifier. Option. Go. There we go. Because I want to be able to option click here. Maybe I do want 100%. Come on. So I'm just going to use this hard brush to try and take out some of these areas. I like to leave a little bit of feathering on it because I don't like seeing my circles at all. But you do want it to be fairly high so that you don't lose the texture in the image. And your brush will probably be pretty small for it, for most of it. But yeah, this brush has to be, where's my brush size? There we go. That's better. Man, they were pretty sloppy with her makeup. Holy cow. When you really zoom in, you realize how bad it is. But I like the extra sharpening around her eyes and stuff, but I think it's too much on the skin right underneath her eyes. So I may actually that's probably a good low frequency deal to try and blur some of that out a little bit. But let's try and, if you find your Gaussian blur filter, that setting works really well. You can simply do your, is it Command Option? Yeah, Command Option, nope, Command Control F is the quick key to reapply the same filter over and over again. Otherwise, it's the first option under the filter menu. So if that setting works well, you don't have to go under blur, Gaussian blur every single time, because that setting may be almost the same. You can simply just blur.
The thing about the Gaussian blur I found though is Careful you don't do it too much, because otherwise it removes the shadows and stuff.
It does. Yep. And a lot of times, depending on what you're selecting, it actually removes a lot of highlight too if you
Yeah.
don't select the right thing. So yeah, so you will have to be careful, but you'll find that there might be a similar setting that's used often. Like you might find cheek areas, forehead areas, you use the same setting that you can just select all those first. Use that quick applied last filter, command control F, and and then it works really well for what you want to do. That's just not enough though. Let's just do that one again. Brush size smaller. I love using the scroll on the Wacom tablet for brush size. It works really well. Oops, because I'm on the wrong layer. The hard part is remembering to go back and forth between the layers. Why? Oh, because I want the clone stamp tool, not the brush. Stamp. There we go. So yeah, so you don't need to be anywhere closer than like 100%.
So now, how would you handle this texture she's got going on in her eyes, like that highlight and low light, or
It's a bit much. Are you talking in the eye itself?
No, like the eye makeup, the shimmer in the corner of her eyes.
Yeah. I would try, and for this one, I might
'Cause it's
try
not
and
really-
blur some of that.
Because it's not really doing anything for low frequency, so I'm trying on high because it looks like it's mainly just texture, you know? And like, what would I
Let's
do
try
there?
that. Let's see what it does under Gaussian blur. I haven't touched her eyes yet. Yikes. That removes all the highlight. We don't want that. You know what, to be honest, to really blur that and lose some of the highlight would be okay because we can dodge and burn that, which is another thing that I want to show you. We could dodge and burn that back in. I might just blur the heck out of that thing, lose some of the highlight, and then put it back in after the fact. How does that look up here for that edge? I think I might do that.
Yeah, it's mainly a texture thing, I think, for me.
Yeah, I think I lose it. It makes the texture more subtle. I think that's what I want to say. When I blur her eyelid to lose some of the highlight, I think it does help with some of that. Let me try that over here too and see if I don't get a similar result. I am gonna lose some of that, and I'm okay with that. Blur. This is where a quick key for Gaussian blur comes in handy. Yeah, actually losing some of the shadow I don't think is bad in this case.
I just cloned an area where it had texture I liked,
Yeah,
and I went over that way. Because it only changed the texture, you know.
it doesn't. And we're using a harder brush, or did you end up using a softer brush just because you're trying to...
35 opacity, and it's a softer brush.
And a softer brush? Okay. So that might be an instance where on the high frequency channel, you would use a softer brush because you are trying to eliminate some of the texture. A softer brush would definitely help with that. I'm going to try something by taking some of this out, shadow out, and then putting it back in with a dodge burn. So this is a lot of back and forth, and it does take a bit of work. I know a lot of fashion retouchers will say it can take anywhere from a quick 5 minutes to 2 hours on an image, depending on what they have to do. This could go on for a while, so I want to show you a few more things. Obviously, when you play around, you'll do a little bit more. For your assignment, you're only going to use one image, and you're going to do the frequency separation and then a little bit more of a higher end retouching with some of the other things I want to show you. You can use this image if you want to, because you'll be taking some time to play around with it. And if you don't have the right image, feel free to use this one. But you may come across them. You could do a Creative Commons search and search on Flickr for one that you could use, that you could get a high enough resolution image. Don't just pull something off of Google if you don't have the right image. some of Scott Kelby's images that come with the book files would work really well for this too, so you could use one of his images. But I do want to show you a few other things here. There's one trick, and this is in the link too, so use this as a reference, that might help with some of that low frequency areas when you're trying to blend some of that. And maybe with this particular image, this might work really well, which is what made me think of it. You can put a layer in between the high and low frequency, which I'll show you. I just want to get to where it is in the article to show you. And you do a surface blur. There's one guy that works completely non-destructively, and I think this is great too. Does a working layer in between there so that he does all his low frequency work on a blank layer, so that if he doesn't like something, he can erase it after the fact. So in this case, you would have to have your sample current and below turned on so that it samples the low frequency layer, or it's not going to work. It's not going to do anything. But you definitely don't want sample all layers, because you would be pulling stuff from the high frequency layer. But this allows you to work with low frequency stuff non-destructively, and you would do the same thing to the high frequency. You would put a blank layer on top of that and then work with the high frequency layer. But surface blur, there it is. So you can put there's a trick here, and I wanted to get the screenshot here because I couldn't remember the settings. You go to the surface blur, and you put this layer. So basically what you are doing, let me get back up here because this makes sense here. So you add a duplicate layer between your high and low frequency.
A duplicate layer of what?
Of your low frequency layer.
Okay.
Wait, that doesn't make sense though. I'm trying to remember how I did that. Duplicate layer of the original, sorry.
Of the background.
Of the original.
Okay.
Yep, so your background layer, oops, go back to Photoshop here. So if you duplicate your background layer, I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to call this surface blur. I'm going to put that in between my low frequency and my high frequency. And it is going to make your image appear sharper because you're hiding your low frequency layer. Zoom out a little bit here, in a little bit.
That's interesting.
Rotate, auto scroll, there we go. And then you're going to go under filter, blur, surface blur. Now, what you're going to do to start, I want this zoomed out just a little bit. There we go. What you're going to do to start is you're going to set this radius to a point. So it's different than what the settings are here, but you're going to drag the radius until you're somewhat happy with how it's blurring it. It's not going to look perfect quite yet. So this threshold is going to be, leave it lower for now, but then you drag this surface blur until, let me turn off this layer. This is going to be easier to show it if I turn off my high frequency layer. There we go. Filter, blur, surface blur. It's easier when you can see it. There we go. So you want to do a surface blur to the point where you're kind of blurring. Now, surface blur is interesting. It finds those areas where there's a lot of detail, and it kind of avoids that to an extent until you get your radius pretty high. But then areas where, like skin and stuff like that, or a sky where all the blue tones are similar, it blurs those. But then detailed areas, it avoids until later on, until you get that setting higher. So you can crank this radius a bit. And I would say, I think the example is somewhere in the 30s, like 30, 31 is what it is. You're probably going to get your radius up to that range with this image because it's a pretty detailed image. Then you're going to crank your threshold all the way up, only for the purpose of bringing it back down and finding a happy medium. So you're going to just slowly, you start with it high and then you bring it back until you're happy with that result. And it's still pretty high here. till you get some of the detail back and you're happy with how it looks. I think mine's going to be pretty low, to be honest. Come on. Mine might end up being close to where it was started.
Right.
Because I'm still getting a little too much in the eyes here. I could take that out, but
So do you want the eyes not popping out like the real word?
it's not going to be as intense with this. We're going to change a few things after we do this, but mine's actually where it started at 15 was probably about where I might want it. I'm gonna hit OK here. Oh, that's working in the background here. You can kind of see in this screenshot about where he got his, where it's a little foggy in the details of the eyes, but there's still some detail back in there.
So what do we do with the surface blur then after?
So then afterwards, you're going to basically mask out to just the skin.
Okay.
So you can change the opacity if you want to with a brush and just kind of brush it in the skin area if you want. I think, to be honest, what would work faster than this, than what it describes in here, is with the surface blur and a layer mask. If you do the color range on the layer mask and just select out the skin so that it avoids the eyes, the lips, and the hair and stuff like that. It will depend on what your background is, things like that, but you could probably get pretty close without having to do a lot of brushing. But if I do the color range and I just do in the skin tone areas here, maybe bring, that is very zombie-like. It's kind of funny. There we go. I really just want it on the skin tones more than anything. I'm going to feather this afterwards, so I'm not going to be too picky. But I can keep adding to this if I want to by holding down my shift key and then clicking on it. Bring my fuzziness back down. There we go. Yeah, I'm gonna end up feathering this. But then I hit OK, excuse me, then I hit OK here. I might feather that mask in my properties panel with my layer mask selected. Just feather that a little bit, maybe a pixel or two. Turn my high frequency back on.
Did you do properties and then when you did the
And then I want to blur. Under properties,
Yeah.
I did color range to
Okay.
select out the skin. And then, oh, I think it's buried. I'll take it. It's no big deal. It's under the boxes. Yep, I did color range, selected out the skin, and then I feathered it just a little bit. Then you can kind of play with the opacity a bit. Honestly, I'm wondering if an overlay. Would work well. It doesn't even say to change this because I feel like I'm losing the low frequency. I almost want to, no, because overlay is going to darken it. That's not what I want. I wonder if soft light might take a, whoa, that's definitely not good. Overlay is going to be bad for that. Boy, that's chameleon-like. That's horrendous. I'm wondering if I were just to, oh, what if I did, lighten's going to be the opposite of what I want. Whoops. Yeah, lighten's not going to do what I want. Darken? Darken's not going to do what I want either. It's better than lighten.
Lighten color?
No, just lighten, blend mode.
Okay.
I don't like it as much. I like the... See, I want to get back to the blurred image. I feel like I should be doing the low frequency and the surface blur on there. I'd almost want to play with that one on this image a little bit more because I'm getting back to my original... I guess I did play on my low frequency layer before I did the surface blur, which is probably a bit backwards. Yeah, I probably should have done the surface blur first. before I did that.
It looks better to do the surface blur on top of the high frequency layer.
On top of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you put the high on, it brings back those like details, like the skin.
So what if we just brought down the opacity of that? See, I still want some, yeah, it is kind of cool in this case, but I still want some of the, mine's set to darken. Maybe in this case, lighten would work better.
I found that lighten color and lighten worked.
Lighten works really well, actually. Yeah, if you put the surface blur at this image on top of it, and then change it to, yeah, I should try lighten color. Lighten color gives a little bit more detail back. Actually, yeah, that's kind of, it works kind of well on this image. Yeah, usually you don't want it on top of the texture, but her skin is like overkill with the
Yeah.
texture.
Yeah.
That in this case, I agree. Surface blur on top of the high frequency layer in lighten or lighten color blend mode, and then maybe playing with the opacity a bit, actually works really well.
I thought so too.
Yeah, I agree. That works great. I would still go back to the high frequency and take out some of the shimmer, like in her eyes here, or
Yeah,
where
on
the
the left
highlight.
cheek.
Yeah, on that, or her right cheek, your left side.
Yeah.
That shadow side, I would take some of that out. Obviously, fine tuning like her eyebrows and stuff like that is something you would want to do. You want to get rid of some of those stray hairs that are sticking out when you're talking fashion retouching. Now, another thing you may want to do, and it even says in every article I've ever read, you don't want to do frequency separation just in one pass. Like, you don't want to do all the retouching in one pass. You might want to do it a couple of times to really get everything blended just right. Like, you might want retouching on the high frequency layer, on the low frequency layer. You might put blank layers in between there and do a separate layer with that retouching. You might run...
It's a lot of play.
Yeah, it is a lot of play. You might do frequency separation as an action. You might run it a couple of times in order to overlay everything the way you want it to be. I've had people tell me they do the low frequency part of the separation twice. Like, they'll actually duplicate that layer and blend it in certain ways, whether it's light and dark in mode, to get the end result that they want. It does take quite a bit of playing. Now, the other part of this retouching, before we run out of time here, is to... Now, do you remember dodging and burning? I'm trying to remember if we did this in digital editing or not. Dodging and burning non-destructively on a layer that's completely filled with gray in overlay blend mode. Do you remember that at all? No? Okay. I want to show you this because I blurred her. Let me get this a little bit larger here. Why does my background look... No, that is right. Okay. It's just sharpening that much. I blurred her eyebrows quite a bit, losing some of the highlights in there, and I said I would add that back in. I'm going to add a layer, a blank layer on top. Actually, I could fill it. I'm just going to add a blank layer. I'm going to call this Dodge Burn on top of everything. So on top of the frequency separation, I might even take it out of the folder and put it on top in case I do other things inside there. And I'm going to fill this with gray. There's a trick. I hate the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop. I don't like them. I don't think they do what they're supposed to do. I think dodging and burning on a separate layer with your brush works 1,000 times better. And then you can undo it. If I fill this, I'm going to do fill or shift F5 to fill with 50% gray. And I'm left with this. So edit, fill, 50% gray. Then you don't have to go find it or figure out what color it is. And then when you change the blend mode of that layer, and I don't want to change it in fill. I want to do this after the fact. Change the blend mode to overlay. It disappears completely. Because if you remember what overlay does, anything darker than middle gray gives the multiply effect. Anything lighter than middle gray gives the screen effect. So when you have middle gray, which is what we just filled it with, and you set it to overlay, it disappears because it doesn't exist. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the brush tool with black and white. So I selected my brush tool, I hit my default colors, and I'm gonna bring my opacity pretty low. 20%, maybe less, maybe more, depending on what I'm doing. I'm gonna feather it quite a bit because I don't like hard edges when I'm doing this. And like I took the highlight out of her eyes here. So let me get back to brush size here. There we go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna brush some of that highlight back in with my white. So I'm gonna swap my highlight or my foreground background colors, and I'm gonna brush that back in. So I'm gonna start with 20% and see what it does. Not too bad. And when you brush with white, you get the screen effect. When you brush with black, which is what I'm gonna do, is I'm gonna swap there because I lost some of my shadow here. I'm gonna brush some of that shadow back in. Oops, that was a little too much. I probably should do 10% with this one. I find highlight, I do a higher opacity than with the shadow, just because it's a little bit more. But can you see how it's starting to add it back in? And I might do that on her cheek too. So I might increase my brush size here. I gotta take out that hair in the foreground, that's driving me nuts. But let's do 10% with black, and I might brush some back in. I'm too close here. I can't stand how close I am when I do the bigger brush. Actually, that's a lot. I might do 5%. You can see what it... So a lot of times I'll just try and get those highlight shadows to where I'm happy with them as far as on that low frequency layer, and then come back with a dodge and burn to really try and accentuate some of those areas. And you're just gonna slowly see on that dodge and burn, if I bring it back to normal, it's just slowly brushing in. And this is why you want the Wacom tablet too, because you can have a real light brush tip with that. So you can just very lightly brush over those areas that you want just a little bit of highlight back in, and just toggle back and forth. The only trick is with the Wacom tablet, when you do that, you get thinner brush strokes. So you do have to play just a little bit. That's too much. And the nice thing is, you can always swap your colors and brush out what you did too much of, or get that middle gray, go back in here and do your RGB values are going to be 128 across the board. And you can then brush your gray back in to essentially erase what you did. Because you can't erase. You'll get rid of the gray and then you can't do what you want to do. So I can just brush that back if I want to. This is too much. There. Go back to my default colors. It's just too much right there. I'm not liking that. But then you can do that in the hair too. So you can, with the hair, with a real thin brush, or if I want to really make that more exaggerated than what it is, I would use 10% here. There we go. Lighten and darken those areas. Or maybe I just want to lighten all of that and just darken certain spots. You can do that. And I often have, it's just too much. My brushes, my hardness is not where I want it to be. I often do dodge and burn on multiple layers. I'll dodge and burn the hair on a different layer than the skin. I'll do the eyes on another layer sometimes too. Not always, but I do. And so there's lots of different ways to play with the dodge and burn tool. But simply gray, layer 50% gray, set to overlay. Use a white and black brush. That's all there is to it. Then it's completely separate. Now the only other thing I want to show you is the liquify and the face recognition with this. Now I don't have a full body image for this particular one, but I want to show you, I'm going to show you with like the jawline, and this will be very similar to if you're doing things with like arms and legs. If you wanted to either make arms bigger, smaller, stuff like that, it's going to be very similar to what we do with the jawline. But what I'm going to do, trying to think. I would either do the liquefy filter first or last. It's got to be one or the other. I would almost say maybe first, just because if you do it last and then you have to go back and retouch something when you're doing frequency separation, you might end up doing it again. So I might do this before I do anything else.
My whole question is like, say we're working on a person who doesn't have a blank background like this, like does it warp it,
yeah.
you know?
And it depends on how you do it. It should not if you do it correctly. And the way I'll show you too, even if you have a busy background, it should still be fine with the same technique. So what I'm going to do, just so I can show you from a before standpoint, because of the frequency separation, I'm just going to duplicate this. You could easily, if you wanted to, do oh boy. And I just push the buttons on the keyboard. There we go. You could easily just take essentially a snapshot on a new layer of where you are at this point and do a Command Option Shift E. It's not an easy quick key. Command Option Shift E stamps the current version of your image and what it looks like on a new layer. So you could do that. Otherwise, I'm just going to duplicate this image and then just essentially delete everything going back to the beginning so that I can still have my other one that I'm working on. So I'm just going to duplicate this. I'm going to liquefy either you're going to liquefy it as a smart object. I don't know that I've ever liquefied as a smart object now that I'm saying this. Oops. Convert to smart object. I don't know that I have liquefied as, no, I have. You can liquefy as a smart object, or you can just liquefy on a duplicate layer. Either way, it will work. For most people, they'll go into liquefy and they don't often go back to it without redoing something anyway, where a smart object, it doesn't necessarily warrant it. But I want to, regardless of whether it's a smart object or not, I want to show you what you can do. In the newer version, I believe it is the 2015.1. I'm trying to remember which version. They added facial recognition, or face detection, I think is what they call it. Oh, they just call it the face tool. No faces detected because her face is off center. Isn't that fantastic?
Oh, mine detected it.
Did it?
Yeah.
Is it dependent on, you're on one layer? It's not detecting those multiple layers?
No, I'm on the background layer. I went back to the original image to do this one. Did you just do a stamp of the where you were at? Maybe I should try that layer.
I basically
Or
have
maybe it's mine's a smart object.
not converted to a smart object.
You did?
Yeah.
And yours detected a face?
Yeah.
Why is
Not
mine?
on a smart object and it didn't detect it.
And it didn't? What the heck? I'm gonna try it on this one.
How
Mine's
do I
not
move the
detecting
points?
faces. So you can't. Are you talking like where it? Are you trying eyes, face? It'd be nice if mine would recognize it. What the heck? Why is mine not recognizing it and yours did? And you're using this image?
Well, I think it's detected. It has the dots around the eyes and the mouth
Yeah.
and stuff and the nose, yeah.
Well, what the heck? Why is mine not recognizing? Well, that's annoying as all get out. Okay, do I have another image I can just temporarily use just to show you this at least? I don't know how much you've played with it, but I need a face. I need a face. Wait, some of these chapter folders had a person in it. Selective color. Sure, let's try this one. Oh, is it not going to open because I did that? There we go. Let's try that one. Filter, liquefy. Please detect a face. Yay, it detected her face. Okay, let's zoom in here. Okay, I'm just gonna grab another image in case yours isn't detecting a face. But when you click the face tool on the left-hand side towards that third from the bottom, if it automatically detects a face, what you can do is when you mouse over, there's all these sliders. I find them useless because I just use everything right here on the face. You can do things like mouse over the head. It recognizes the outline of the head, and this forehead one will increase, decrease the size of the forehead. If someone's conscious about the size of their forehead, you can do jawline, anything you want to do there. The width of the face overall, not that you would want to do that. The liquefy tool is where we become plastic surgeons, and we can use this for good and for bad. There's different things as far as the nose, if you need to shift that around. You can grab the sides of the mouth and make it look like she's smiling or frowning. And then you can also, that is just way too much.
You can make their eyes super huge.
You can make their eyes gigantic if you want to, and smaller. So if their eye is uneven, and this is an awesome way to use this tool, if their eye is uneven, like usually the eye that's further away tends to maybe be a little bit more squinted, or it just looks not proportional because it's away from the camera. You can increase or decrease that eye to even it out if you want to. You can also turn a person's eye, which I know is just weird.
What?
You can turn it if you grab the side.
Oh.
Let me undo that. If you grab that little half circle,
Weird.
you can tilt the eye in one direction or the other.
So if you have somebody with squinted eyes, you can maybe make them less squinty.
You can, yep, exactly. You can try and even that out a little bit so you can make them a little bit bigger. But yeah, there's lots of different things to do as far as bloating the eye, not making it open or closed a little bit, and then tilting it. I'm totally messing with her eye. Can I reset the eyes? Let's just reset everything here because I've kind of messed with her quite a bit.
How do you reset? Oh.
There's a reset button here. Reset all, you can have multiple faces recognized in here and reset all of them. But you can simply double click any of these sliders to reset that particular one. So yeah, so we can make that eye a little bit larger. So there's a lot of good and bad that can be done here with the face recognition. But if you have, aside from the face recognition tool, what I think works really well is the forward warp tool. That's where you can start like pushing things around and making a hot mess out of what you're doing. Let me see if I can reset. Is it going to? No, I don't want to reset this. I want to reset that. Really? I used to be able to reset in here. Is it because I did the face mask? That sucks. Maybe I can reset that. All right, well, whatever. I'm going to cancel and go back out of there because I was just playing and I screwed it up. I should be able to do that without having to reset.
I agree.
I must be missing something. That's okay. I'll look for it. So here's the thing that I would recommend. If you're not using the face recognition tool or the face is not recognized, use the forward warp, but most people use too small of a brush, or they use the warp in the wrong spot. And you don't want to do that. I'm going to undo that. You use the forward warp and you put a fairly large brush, but then you put the brush in the middle because whatever it grabs from the middle point is where it pushes or pulls depending on which direction you're going. So if you have too small of a brush, it's a very obvious warp and it doesn't work well. But if you have a larger brush and you grab in the middle and you just slowly push it up, it might take a couple of passes to do that. You're not going to notice that warp a whole lot, especially with a busy background. You're not going to notice that much. But you often have to do a couple passes at it. And the larger brush does make a smoother line, especially if it's the jaw, if it's the arm. Like if I want, like she's got small arms, so this is probably pretty useless of a tool for the moment. But like if her elbows were too big, you know, like in fashion, they would say that the elbows are too big. that they would actually tuck the elbows in.
That's funny.
The larger brush and just subtly doing it is going to make it more realistic and less lumpy. I know lumpy is probably a weird word to use, but it's the right word in this case. So there's a little bit of push and pull there. Now, again, this image is not a good image for this particular technique, but if you have, like, she does not have any, like, arm fat in the crease or anything, but let's say that's something you were trying to get rid of. Another one that you might use is the pucker tool. They have a pucker and a bloat tool, which is very bad when you're we're doing plastic surgery on a person. The pucker and the bloat tool. The pucker tool is good in instances where you have like excess skin that you're trying to get, like if someone says like I want my folds removed, but like my double chin, I want that removed. It's great for double chins, but you have to be very careful with how you use it. Again, larger brush and just small taps, like sucks it in, is basically what you're doing. You're not going to eliminate it because it's not going to look real, but the pucker tool essentially literally sucks it in. Like you feel there should be a sound effect with it.
And if you hold it, it keeps going.
And if you hold it, it keeps going until you stop, and it looks absolutely ridiculous. So I can only go back one step here.
Oh God, this is so much fun.
So yeah, so it's just small little taps will take care of some of that. So if you have, like, she's got nothing. What do I do with this? Maybe if I want to bring her shoulder in, I can use the pucker tool a little bit. It's a little bit overkill, but it could work. Her eyes, stuff like that. I'm trying to see if there's anything. There's got to be something. Give me something here to work with. There's nothing. Such the wrong image to use. But yeah, so the pucker tool would work for those instances. Great for double chins, great for those armpit areas that you want to get rid of. Sometimes too in eyelids, if you have somebody with lots of creases in their eyelids, the pucker tool works well for that too. So you could try that there. But that face recognition tool is probably the best addition they've ever put into the Liquify tool. If you can't do it though, the forward warp and pucker are probably the ones you're going to use the most, more than anything else that's in here.
So you think Smart Object to go into it?
I would, if you can, simply because then you can change some of this, especially when it comes to the face. The other parts of the Liquify tool, it's kind of useless because you're going to distort and do something different anyway. But for the face recognition, I probably would use it. Yeah, so you can be destructive. So, I ran long, but we're good. Wacom tablets can just be tossed in a pile here. You are simply going to do one retouch for next week with frequency separation, and then anything else you feel necessary to make it look good. Use that image if you want. I'll put a Creative Commons link for searching for Flickr with something you would have the rights to actually edit in a high resolution. Otherwise, use your own. Or go, oh my gosh. Or go into the studio and take one and do it with somebody. That's hilarious.
I've never really used Liquify, so I was just playing.
I'm telling you, Liquify can be used for good and bad.
Wait, we gotta see the before and after. Okay, ready? Before, after.